been over there for about a week.
In 6 hours, and this is like a lot. I mean, this is something that you could really barely, one person could do without it. They were really in good shape, maybe 20 hours. I mean, this is down, up, down, up. And so he must have ran, he had to have, it had to be guys like, where he wasn't stopping.
Jordan said
Fill his camelback. He probably didn't even have a camel, because you were actually off that day, and that's, I mean, most of it, I don't know what, you guys all ready? It's gotta be 40%.
Yep. You guys ready?
Yes, yeah, it's recording. So
He had to.
We'll go ahead and get started here, guys.
So, it's crazy.
you need a gavel. I was gonna say, Casey, we're getting you a gavel now.
Use your cup.
Didn't we have a gavel?
We should get a gavel.
Big gavel.
If I ever became chairman
Maybe
again, and I
better.
had a gavel,
Jim,
you go,
not a gavel.
I have.
Jim Mangan again. I think Jim Mangan had a gavel.
Casey, one a gavel.
Maybe that's why they took it.
That'd be fun.
It probably got taken away when
How
I
about
was
a
Yeah.
squeaky one? You know, one of those.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Today's May 30th, 2023. Welcome to the Great Falls International Airport Authority Board meeting. As a reminder, the mission of Great Falls International Airport is to optimize transportation services and development in our region, and the vision of the Great Falls International Airport is to maximize the airport's benefit to our region. Welcome to the public. Thank you guys for being here. Feel free to speak up at any time. We'd love to hear what you have to say. If you would, please just stand, identify yourself, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. We will start with the roll call. Commissioner Eritz.
Here.
Commissioner Gibbs.
Here.
Commissioner Hogan.
Yes.
Commissioner Lalonde is here. Commissioner Thompson.
Present.
Commissioner Timbo.
Here.
All right. Quorum of the board president. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Starting with the consent agenda, remember the consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have a significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion or vote by any board member. Item A, approval of board meeting minutes for April 2023 and budget committee meeting minutes for May 2023. Payroll checks for April totaling $118,942.42. Item C, maintenance and operations checks totaling $522,594.57. Item D, approved passenger facility charge totaling $55,084.32 for April 2023. And item E, financial reports for April 2023. You don't have the check numbers on there, does that matter?
Oh, I
Yeah, it
apologize.
does matter.
I apologize. They're in there.
You want to just give them
The check number?
Yep.
They're,
And I'll
check-
add it to it.
check numbers 27,493 to 27,523.
Perfect, yeah, so if we just add that.
Yep.
Anybody have anything else they would like to pull or discuss on the consent agenda? All right, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda after we have the check numbers?
Made a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Got a motion?
Second it.
And a second. All in favor of approving consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And nay. The ayes have it. All right, director's report.
Yes, a lot of things to talk about this month. Through the first 4 months of the year, through April, we're, I would say, very normal on boardings compared to the last 10 years. It's ironic how flat our boardings, have been for large stretches of time. If you look back 10 years, we're kind of right in the middle with 2023 We're a little behind 19, about 400 passengers out of 50,000 the first 4 months, lighter than 19, but very much in line with where we've been for the past decade, which is good and bad. I mean, you know, we're hopeful to see some of these green shoots of growth in our community and see that translate over to seats being used in the here at the airport. We still have a little bit of capacity, unused capacity in the Delta side, particularly. They're still running mid-60s with their load factors. We'd like to see that low 70s, mid-70s. United continues to fill their planes right up to the 80% load factor mark. Allegiant's hitting 90s now, so they're at full capacity. And then Alaska also getting in the low 80s. So still a little bit of capacity there on the Delta side, but other than that, everyone's filling their planes nicely. So really solid first 4 months of the calendar year. United starts their Airbus service on Friday. They'll be flying in June all 320s, so that's great. That gives us about 20 extra seats from the original schedule per day, because they had one 319 and one 320 in the schedule, but now they've sent it all to 320. So that's really terrific. That's 320 schedule continues into September. And even in October, we still have Airbuses. So they may be trying to make that transition to mainline flights out of Great Falls, which would be fantastic. Chicago also starts this Saturday on a 319, so that's great too. Getting those extra flights in for summer, really exciting to see United spreading their wings a little bit here. On the construction side, Alaska and Allegiant, you might have seen when you came in, are in their temporary location. We've taken the new counters and moved them out into the lobby. So we can wall off behind them, dust wall that, and then Terrazzo will start actually this week. Art's coming up and starting the flooring behind there. Once they get the flooring in and the ceiling in, then Alaska and Legion will move to their new counters. Those counters will be moved back, and then they'll start on United. So progress definitely in the last month has been really good, I think, with that project. Alaska's offices now are nearing completion. They've got to get in there and grind the floor. That'll be a polished concrete floor. So they got to get in and grind the floor and finish the ceiling. But other than that, the offices are pretty much there. And I think they're scheduled to move in about a month, aren't they?
Yeah, about a month, yep.
So Alaska will be moving, and then United will be the last airline that we kind of work in their office space. But the majority of their office space is right behind their current space. So that's almost all framed out now. The construction crews have been in there building out those offices behind their current office. So quite a bit of progress has been made there also. The icing ramp starts next week, isn't it?
The 5th, yep.
The 5th, so that would be good to get that, getting that project going again. About 60 days to completion, so we should be done in mid-August with that project. We're hoping to bid the canopy project in June. Plans are probably getting close to 50% by now, aren't they, Steve? 75, good. And so we'll get that project out here next month and hopefully get somebody to bid that and start on that work. Access control designs well on its way. We met with them today to talk about locking mechanisms. And they're going to start some installation in June, start running cable and things for that project. So hopefully we'll start to see some construction on that project here in the next month, 45 days. On the signage, Rod, have you got any update on that one?
I've seen some communication back between Tobacco and the sign firm. They're still working out some details there, but I hope it'll start in June.
Yeah.
But I don't have a firm date.
And we're hopeful to get that project underway. And there is some outdoor work, but it would be nice to get out of the way of that canopy project and have the signs done before they've got to work in front of those signs on the canopies. So hopefully that'll get going here in a month. And that'll replace all the exterior signage on this side, with the exceptions of the signs on the canopies. Those will go with the canopy project. And then the big sign that hangs over the escalator goes away and be replaced with that project also. Saturday, I'm heading down to Denver to participate in the AAAE conference. That's our trade association, American Association of Airport Executives. We're going to be following up with some small airports, trying to get some LEO reimbursement agreements. We continue to struggle to get our LEO reimbursement from TSA, and they continue to tell us they want this and that and that. in a future agreement. We can't even get them to pay on the old agreement. So one of the things I want to talk to a bunch of airports about is I'd like to see copies of their agreements so we can kind of look and see what's best practice in some of those other agreements, and ensure we're getting a straight story from TSA, because the ones we've looked at in the past have not had that language in there about stationing of the police officer, and they have to be in the checkpoint. And so we want to ensure that that is in fact what they're paying on elsewhere. In addition, several of the Montana airports are going to be meeting with a few of the other Northwest airports to talk about employee screening. As I mentioned in one of the weekly reports last month, TSA adopted new employee screening rules. And that'll require the airport to take on the responsibility for screening employees, including their employees, which is kind of ironic. The interesting thing about that is that most airports, especially the larger airports, all the concessionaires today go through the checkpoint. So the food concessionaires, the retail people, most of those people are going through the checkpoint. Under the new rules, airports will be responsible for setting up random checkpoints. They've got a whole calculation formula of how to calculate how much random to do, and you have to have a random door picked, and this, that, and the other thing. And so we're going to switch from screening those guys every time they go through to screening them randomly. So it's not even an increase in security for some classes of employees. In addition, Montana's constitution and search and seizure laws, it creates a liability problem for the airports, because we have no right to detain someone who doesn't want to be searched. So if that person says, no, I don't think I'll be searched today, and they go to a different door, what crime have they committed? What reasonable doubt do we, or reasonable suspicion do we have that we should go and track them down and shake them down? It creates a whole series of issues under Montana law in particular, because there is such a strong search and seizure constitutional provision. Further, the question becomes, if we deny someone access for whatever reason, whether they don't want to submit to a search, or they have something that we tell them, no, you can't take that in today, you need to go elsewhere, are we responsible if they get canned? And that's something that's actually come up around the country. Can we be held liable for lost wages? Can we be held liable for them being fired because they can't get to their work? Those are questions that everyone in the industry has that have not been vetted very well by TSA. And so we've had one call already with Senator Tester's office, because he's on Homeland Security Subdivision or Subcommittee, and we're going to have a meeting down in Denver and meet with a couple other airports in the Northwest Division and try to pack together a number of congressional districts, so we've got a little bit larger audience to get something done with that. And so TSA is implementing the rules. They're going to be in place in the next 60 days, and then you have 3 years after that to come up with explosive detection equipment, which is another interesting one, because we're not trained to operate that. TSA has warehouse loads of it, but we would have to go out and acquire that equipment to swab hands. We might have had that done to you in one of the checkpoints somewhere. We would have to acquire that and operate it. And so Kalispell has done a pretty good job of calculating. They think it's 22 man hours a week for their operations, so we would expect it to be similar to ours using TSA's little formulas, which is a half-time position. And so you can imagine that across 300 airports, we've got thousands of employees and millions of dollars of equipment in 250 commercial service airports across the country, which explicitly are not allowed to be used for this purpose. But we're going to go down and talk about it in Denver some. I volunteered to work in the Northwest region to try and put together a committee to formulate some ideas on how we approach this. There's a good chance that at least one airport will litigate it. We may join on that suit, and I would think maybe a couple other airports in the region would too. So more to come on that. And then the following week, I leave to go down to Jumpstart. I get back Monday. That conference ends Monday. I'll be back Monday night, and then Wednesday I'm leaving to go down to Jumpstart the next weekend. That's the annual airline conference. We've got 8 airline meetings next week, next week? Following week. We've got 8 airline meetings, and there'll be some really good discussions in there. Be our first meeting with American since we got the SCASA grant, which would be really good. And a couple other carriers down there too. We've really got a full plate, so I'm excited to hear what some of those airlines have to say. Several new prospects that we've been working on, newer prospects. We'll be meeting with a lot of our current carriers now. I think the only carrier we have that isn't, we don't have a meeting with is United. They're not attending this year, but everybody else is. So should be a really good conference. And excited to get down there and talk about routes for 24. So anything else you guys have? Did I miss anything? All right, I think that's all I got. You guys have any questions for me?
With all these new TSA requirements, are they going to provide money for that also?
Nope, unfunded. Yeah, that's one of the complaints of the industry is, you know, where does this, I mean, we just keep getting more and more and more stacked on, and, you know, no attempt to work with airports to come up with better solutions.
You can't see the liability if you deny someone entry for violating the entry requirements. I mean, that just,
The problem is, it comes down to search and seizure.
you don't search them, you just deny entry.
Right, but what keeps them from going to another door and just getting in there? Because they know we're going to be doing it randomly.
Well, now they're breaking law, and they have to be searched.
They don't, but CSA isn't adopting any rules about what happens if you don't submit to the
Oh.
search. So there's really no reason they can't just say, nah, and go to a different door. I mean, we can adopt local rules, but again, you're accepting the liability of, you know, what happens if you turn that person away or if they get in with something they shouldn't. You know, I mean, it's a dual-edged sword. We end up with liability on both sides.
Is there something driving this change? Has there been
Inside,
incidents?
they're worried about insider threat. You know, I think that's been a concern of theirs for some time. And one of the things I've said, and you know, you don't really get an answer to it, is, you know, we're in a world where, you know, the employees that are given access to the airfield, full FBI background check, fingerprints, you know, it's renewed often. I mean, they get the full bill in terms of, you know, psychological and criminal background. You know, and then at the same time, we've adopted screening rules for pre-check where we've said, you know, we'll run a couple checks on you and then we'll reduce the amount of screening you get to something that's way less intrusive than a full body scanner. It's just a metal detector. We all know those have been gamed for years. You know, so in one world, we think it's great that if you submit your information, we get to take a little closer look at you, you know, you're a lower risk. On the other hand, when you submit all that paperwork and we take a good look at you, we say you're still a risk. You know, how can those two things both be true when you have no relationship at all with that passenger, and these employers work with these people every day and know them on a personal basis? So to me, it's a hypocritical thought. I've never been a fan of pre-check. I think it's silly to think that we've yet to psychologically profile someone and identify them, you know, as a concern before anything happens. So how are we relying on a lower level of security with thousands of people that are willing to pay $75, you know, at the same time we say these employees are a big problem when we interact with them daily? I mean, and then, by the way, we're all protected by a chain link fence, which you don't have to be an Einstein to figure out how to circumvent that system. You know, and so, I mean, you know, there's been a lot of, you know, commentary about this isn't real security. You know, it's you know, theater, security theater, I think is what most people are calling it. You know, and so, I mean, it is a concern of the industry. It's a higher cost. And part of the problem is the super big airports, you know, the real big guys, you know, they have full-time security directors. Well, here's a chance to get a few more FTEs and elevate your position in the organization. And, you know, then TSA will work with you on these great little committees so that you get to go to some conferences and get to be a big shot in that world. So there's the upper orbit of a few airports that think this is just dandy because the security person, you know, thinks it's great. You know, so you've got some support from the high-end part of the airports, you know, to do this. And then you've got, you know, the majority of the smaller airports saying, I mean, this is a huge burden. We have this checkpoint, let's use it, you know, for these employees. We don't want the liability of it. You know, so it's kind of a mess.
So you, basically, John, you're saying that the government does nothing well. That's what I just heard. The government does nothing well, and this is yet another example of that.
I think the government is good at making people criminals.
have into your agreements with the airlines a waiver for the airport that says, you know, we have the right to conduct this type of security, and your employee, if found to be in violation of our policy, it's on you.
It's still a civil problem, you know what I'm saying? I mean, you can't give away your rights, you know.
But I, as a passenger, then don't want search and seizure either when I go through TSA.
and-
So can I do that?
And they
Could I
can-
say that when I'm
so
going through security?
That's a hot button in TSA worlds too. TSA would like us to detain people that won't go through screening. But especially in Montana, there isn't a way to detain them. And so, you know, if they come to the checkpoint and won't submit to the search, you know, that they can tell them to leave, and we can tell them to leave, you know, but we can't detain them. You know, so that's yet another problem. Even though if you look through the rules that you sign up for, and when you buy an airline ticket, it says that you'll submit to a search and you'll do all these things, you know, but no one can force you to submit to that search. If you get to the checkpoint and say, I don't want to do it, I'm going to leave. You know, in Montana at least, you can leave unless we have reasonable suspicion. I mean, obviously, if you show up with drugs coming out of your bag, you know, then we can search.
Sounds like we might need to do something legislatively to make our point of the legislature to protect entities such as airports.
I mean, you know, certainly you can. I think there's a lot of states that are going to be in the same situation, a lot of small airports in the same situation of, okay, what do we end up being liable for? I mean, if we shake you down and find criminal stuff, you know, I mean, why did we search you? You know, because TSA told us to, but we don't have there is no federal protection for that. We're not in the federal system. You know, we're not protected from liability.
But what are you searching for?
Exactly.
Exactly. I mean, if the guy's got drugs on him, that's not an airport issue, right? But if he's got a bomb, that's another story.
Exactly.
If he's got a gun or a knife.
This is the slippery slope. This is exactly the problem. And TSA got sued it's been probably 15 years ago when I was in Seattle because they hit on a lady that had cocaine in plastic bags. And so they found it and they said, is this yours? And she grabbed it and swallowed it, killed her dead. So they faced criminal or civil penalties for that. The employees that were involved, the TSA, everybody. And I think it was ultimately settled, but I mean, that was a big deal.
So what's the timeline on all this? Like, is it certain that this is gonna happen?
Well, so they've laid it out in rulemaking. I think it starts in 60 days, right?
So
We're not in the first cut. So Bozeman is in the first cut because of size, and we won't be in the first cut. But their plan is to roll it out to everybody. And then the larger airports, they have a faster schedule for adoption of technologies and all this. But you have, I think, 60 days it starts taking place, and you're supposed to submit a schedule. We don't have to yet because they're starting by size of airport. Our rulemaking will come later, but we want to get involved now and hopefully turn the entire thing back, you know, while we still can, or at least come up with reasonable rules. Or even funding would be helpful. Because for us, 22 hours a week, to have our one officer doing something is a huge burden when we only have 13 employees, 14 employees.
Keep us updated.
Fun stuff.
Anything else for director's report?
That's all I've got.
Anything else on capital project updates?
Nope.
Nothing there. Cash reserves report? Anything to talk about there?
Nothing really, it's pretty, we're doing really well still. Our sweep account, we're making about $80 a day usually, if not a little bit more.
We
for-
did finally get through through that, so it's now FDIC insured.
Yep.
We were able to declare ourselves as a public entity, which allowed us to be FDIC insured and have a sweep account. And so we've navigated that and making a little money on that. And cash reserves have held up really well. And supposedly, I don't know, Steve, if you might even have an update, but supposedly any day now we'll start to get the money from our bipartisan infrastructure bill that we've put into the terminal. So we should start rebuilding cash reserves here a little bit more before we start drawing it down again. But there's about $1 million that we should, about $1.1 million, isn't it?
1.3 in bill should be coming in the next couple of weeks in an offer, and then about 600,000 in AIP. And then in late July, we're supposed to get another 1.3 in bill.
So hopefully we'll start rebuilding, and then we've got those projects that aren't built, or that aren't federally supported, like the warehouses. That's gonna be about $1.3 million that should be coming due over the next 3 months. We'll probably have an initial payment, and then once the steel is delivered, a secondary payment. Then we have the bag system down there, which is $700,000 on its own. That'll be due in September. So some big bills coming, but the good news is the cash reserves are holding in pretty well. We've been able to continue to put some of that money back in higher yield CDs as it's come due. So we get a little bit of yield on that too.
Any update on the condos, more specifically the tenant?
No, we haven't heard from them in a couple weeks. We followed up with some, with the EDC, Sweetgrass EDC, to see kind of where things were on the working with their lender. And I haven't heard anything. If you heard anything from Sarah, so we kind of told them, look, we need to order the other 3 if we're going to get the other 3 ordered. And that's kind of when things dropped off. So at this point, I'm assuming that's probably a 24 project for them, and we're going to look at some other leads we have to see if we can get the warehouses out that we have now out leased or sold. And so we've had, I think, 2 or 3. We finally put got the pricing, the subcontracts, and everything together. And those units end up being about $949 a piece, so 30 by 80 is $949,000, and then the rental rate is $24.50 a square foot per year, per square foot per year. So we finally got the pricing and put that out on LoopNet, and we've had a couple of people contact us already, and so I think we'll continue to follow up on those leads and kind of see what else is out there. So. I do hope, I eventually will run into this person. I know him pretty well, so, and see, kind of where they are. It might just be they can't pull it together this year and it's a next year thing for them. So we're still hopeful. I still think they're a good tenant for that development. We just may not catch them in the first phase. So. Yep.
Any other comments or questions?
Is there an update on the cell phone tower situation?
I would guess it would probably come to the next meeting. Still trying to get the right person to talk to, which I did get a call back last week, so hopefully that's the right person when I talk to him. But to nothing.
But you guys were looking at going with third party, is that right?
No, just trying to deal with Verizon directly, and it's not Verizon because it's already been sold once. So trying to deal with that third party already before looking at another third party.
Cool. Item 1, O&M budget for 23-24.
Yeah, so in the last couple of weeks, we did meet with the Finance and Audit Committee and presented a preliminary budget for the year. The feedback we got, they thought they were possibly a little light on the wage side, so we did go back and add some in. And then the other thing we had noticed was we hadn't put the expense side of the car wash and AdMax interest in there, so we added that also. We don't pay that debt directly. I've always struggled with how we present that on our, especially the AdMax one, because we don't even directly guarantee that. It's kind of off balance sheet financing, but since we have the revenue in there, we decided we wanted to have the expense in there too, so we've added that in. Other than that, the budget next year is looking like it's going to be about 3.2 million, 3.3 million, somewhere there. It's an increase of about 9% over the current year. That's primarily because we're adding an FTE. We plan to put in a position for the new LEO position. As we've mentioned in previous meetings, the cost of that hired security that we have is approaching the cost for us to have an employee. And so we had always assumed we would add in that position over time and have that FTE have a 5th officer out there. And so we're planning to do that in the next year. And so The budget for this year, if you kind of look down through individually, you'll see we're anticipating increases in wages, benefits, and soft costs of employees. Those are the big ticket numbers, about 10% on the fringe benefit side and 13% on payroll.
What did you guys decide on the wages? Where'd you end up there?
So we have budgeted, and Laura's actually gone through now and kind of tailored it to what we expect the raises to be this year. So it's an actual true cost, but I think we figured out the total average is about 3.5, isn't it?
Yeah.
3.5, it might be closer to 4. So we'll probably do a cost of living, small cost of living, and then everything else merit this year. But we have a little bit more in that pool so that we can kind of do that a little better. We've had a little bit of turnover last couple of years, and so that tends to keep, I mean, when you look at the raises we give versus what we actually end up paying out, and, you know, we might end up giving raises of, say, average of 5%, you know, but then by the time we have turnover, like last year we lost one of our Leos, moved back east, you know, then we start that position over again, and so, you know, and we have a gap of a month or something while we get someone hired, we end up lower than the raises we actually give. In total payroll, so that's kind of where we end up there. But we are adding a position. That's why the when you look at the total cost there, it's higher than that. And then we're anticipating. We've kind of tried to limit our fuel consumption near the end of the year here. Obviously, the next item on the board agenda is an increase to the current year's budget. So we're going to come into the summer with a pretty empty fuel tank, and so. You can see we've got about 9% budgeted in fuel increase. That's partially because we have no inventory now. So we're going to start the year by buying some fuel, and then we do anticipate pricing to be higher than it is in the current year. So in total, that ends up being about 9%. So overall, the budget other than that, you know, there's a few other subtle changes, but overall, it's not too dissimilar from this year, about 9% total in the increase over the current year. We've also got a couple of small capital purchases in there. We sometimes buy things through the operating budget as part of the operating budget. If it's under $50,000, the airline agreement allows us to put it into the operating budget. So we just have this year 2 projects that we put into the operating budget there. Let's see, what page that's on.
17.
What is it?
17.
17. Sorry, lost somehow. I knew what they were last week. Oh yeah, right there on the cover. That was smart. We do need to do some improvements to terminal Wi-Fi. That the access points have been in since the remodel back in 12, 13, something like that. And so we need to replace those. In addition, we need to speed up the interface between the parking system and our network. It's a separate system out there, and the CCTV link between the two isn't quite quick enough. And so we want to improve the speed of that so there's not so much latency. We think that terminal Wi-Fi will be about $15,000 project. We're also planning a second phase of the access control system for $30,000. We've got a couple competing priorities for that. We need to do something to the end of the loading bridges out there. We've got those 5 doors out on the loading bridges. There's not a great way to get electric to those because, as you can imagine, that bridge goes up and down and in and out. So it's not the easiest system to get like communication cable to, because that cable's got to be wired in a way that it can be flexible. So I imagine we'll probably try to get those doors done next. There's some other potential priorities too. We've got the bottom of the stairwells on each of the gates, and eventually we'd like to get to access control. But our plan is every year to do $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to continue to roll that system out and add more doors into it so that we can get fully over to an access control system after this first initial program. So those are the 2 projects we have in there, and that's going to be about $30,000 this next year, we anticipate. So we'd like the board to approve the operating budget and the 2 capital projects, which total about $45,000.
I'll make a motion to approve the 2023-24 budget.
Do you guys have any comments from the budget meeting? Anything in particular?
No, he addressed them, I think.
Everything we mentioned, he addressed.
The only other thing I'd note is just revenue is expected to go 17% higher. It's added, you know, if you think about it, a year ago we didn't have Minneapolis, So that's primarily Minneapolis coming back, plus United's continuing to add more capacity. So we do anticipate revenue to be substantially higher than in the next fiscal year than it was this fiscal year, and to outgrow expense growth, so that's positive.
Question on income for concessions, being the newbie. It looks like food and beverage concessions, you projected 71% increase, and then the other two, rental car and gift and news, up 40. What's the reasoning behind that? Are you serving better food? We have more people eating candy bars.
I don't think that percentage increase is quite right.
Inflation.
No, so I think part of it is this year, looking at the operating results back on, let's see if you have the financials in here. We under budgeted the current year substantially. And I think this year, I want to say it's 150, 160 we're going to hit this year. Find out. Yeah, so back on page 8 here, nope, 7. So year to date on page 7, if you look down on 408,002, you can see through April we'd already hit 142,000. We had budgeted that 102,000, and we didn't know for sure when Minneapolis might come back or how full our flights might be. Even when you think back a year ago, we were still all thinking about COVID, even if not present in your mind, but in terms of trips and things like that, people were still not taking conferences and that stuff. And so we had it budgeted substantially lower than what we were going to end up. I expect this year we'll probably end up right at 160. And then next year we are anticipating passenger growth over 10%. I think in the next fiscal year, in addition to having Minneapolis, because Minneapolis only started in February this year, and our fiscal year starts in July, so we'll have that full 6 months prior to that for Minneapolis. In addition, I do anticipate Alaska will add back that second flight in the springtime. So we should see that. I do think there's a possibility we might see some new service next spring, and even an expansion to Chicago next June, which will still help us. So it's primarily driven by anticipated passenger growth on that one. On the concession contract, we've broken out a little differently how we're budgeting for that. I think that's back here. Rental car concessions. So there's two components to rental car concessions. There's the actual minimum annual guarantee, and then there's the concession revenue, which they pay the greater of 10% of revenue or the minimum annual guarantee. And so when we were budgeting this year, we have it all in the top line. If you look on the concession fee, where's the other half of that on the current budget?
On our current, it's all in rental car concessions.
You've got both of them
Yeah,
in
both
last
of them are
week,
in
like two.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so we actually went back and looked at the contract for the next year and put in the actual contract value. Because again, back on the actual results this year, that should have been closer to $709,000. A year ago, we were still entertaining the idea of a rental car reduction in concessions. Many airports across the country had suspended minimum annual guarantee. And so we were still kind of in that process of would we suspend it for another year or would we not suspend it for another year. So when we were doing the budget last May, that was still factored into the budget amount. And we're going to exceed it by not quite 100,000, but pretty close to 100,000 this year. So for next year, when we looked at the contract, there's no chance we're going to suspend the MAG, so we budget up to the full MAG this year. So it's mainly good news. We're going to outperform the budget substantially on revenue, but then we do expect next year to actually have growth beyond our normal revenue. And this year, I was just curious if the parking revenue, we didn't think we would get anywhere near $1 million when we were budgeting last year, but it looks like now we're going to exceed $1 million in parking for this year and then grow from that. But yeah, even on parking, we only budgeted last year $797, so we were $200,000 off on that one, just not knowing what the passenger volume would do. Yep.
All right, I have a motion to approve the 2023-2024 budget. Any other questions or comments? Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye and nay. The ayes have it. Item 2, fiscal year 22-23 O&M budget revision.
And this is, part of the discussion we just had. Although, one thing just looking back on the last page of that budget presentation, I meant to point it out, but we also adopt our user rates now, and next year we're anticipating an airline cost per enplanement of $4.54. On that very last page, kind of middle of the page, you can see it, table 10. I think that's just fantastic that we're down below 5. This might well be the lowest cost per enplanement we've had in 20 years. And it's very aggressive and very competitive with other airports in the region. So essentially what this says is the airlines in total fees will pay us $4.54 per passenger. Contrasting that to Denver's probably around 35 by now. Seattle, when I was there, which was nearly approaching 20 years ago, we were in the mid-20s. Some of the New York airports are in the 40s. And even some of the smaller airports in our region. And as an ex-airport consultant, this was really where you focused your airport's attention when you were talking about future capital growth and those things. And most of my clients, I would advise them to be under 6. And for us to be at 454, I think it just represents a real commitment to keeping the fees low for the airlines and looking to grow that commercial airline service. And so I'm pretty excited about those numbers. I know I shared them last week with a couple prospective airlines, and they were pretty excited about how low we're keeping the rates. And so that's just an exciting aside there. On the amendment, if you religiously follow our financials, April really helped us a lot without as much snow. We caught up quite a bit on the overage we were anticipating. We thought we were going to come in about 4% high. We now think that might even be well under 2%. We might even be able to squeeze our way right into the budget. But nonetheless, with only a month left, we don't want to cut it that close and exceed the budget by something we should have probably asked for. So we're asking for a 2% increase on the budget. The main reasons are we had those kind of 2 surprises of the contracted cleaning, where we had after we started the fiscal year, our longtime cleaning company downsized and dropped us as a client. Then we went out and got a new one, and we only got a few months with them before they asked for an increase. And so we've had to hire yet a 3rd company in the same fiscal year. And so that has really driven up costs pretty substantially, nearly $35,000, where we used to budget that at $100,000. Next year we're budgeting that closer to $150,000, just to kind of give you an idea of the order of magnitude increase. And then the other thing that really hurt us this year was the overtime and the temp help with all the snow. We just had persistent snow, unlike what we normally have, where we might have even frankly larger storms, but only a few of them. This year we just had plagues of storms, smaller ones, death by 1,000 cuts. And so we had to keep our guys on overtime and bring in temps throughout most of the winter. That hurt us some too on the supply side. We certainly burned through quite a bit more fuel than we normally do. And so on the next page, you can see we're going to blow the fuel budget by about $26,000. We've been able to claw some of the savings back in other areas, but not enough to get us under budget. And so we have, just in those 3 categories, $90,000 in overage. But like I said, we've saved elsewhere. We've kind of cut back on the marketing expenses some. So we'd like to ask for a $60,000 increase in the budget to finish out the last month and keep us within the budget authorization for the year. So that'll bring the current 22-23 budget to $3,049,290 by adding that $59,790 to it. And we'd like to ask the board for permission to spend that last little bit. Otherwise, we're going to have a real everybody gets a week off, no pay. But I actually think we might deliver under, but it's just hard to project with 1 month left. We had to buy a little bit of fuel a couple weeks ago. Hopefully that'll get us through the end of the year.
Just for fun, John, if we were to deny this, what do you do?
And we cut off P cards and send everybody home for a week.
Does the airport still function without you here?
We'd have to do kind of one at a time. We've still got like 6 weeks left in the year, so we just roll them. You know, I take a week, and then Rod take a week, and that kind of thing. And we'd have to do something like that. There isn't enough discretionary spending left in the year to get us through. And a lot of it too, like during the winter months, we had a lot of, I don't know if you remember, we had cold temperatures in September. So we had the back of the building open, hoping to get the thing enclosed in September, and we were running the heaters down there to keep pipes from freezing with the back of the building open, and we just didn't have a choice. So a lot of, that type of thing too, where we just, it was an unfortunate year for a lot of reasons that pushed us, a little beyond what we normally would have.
A relevant question right now. You just print more money?
Maybe.
What's your end date? What's that? Just that date?
June 30. A month from today.
Mr. Chair, I move that we amend the fiscal year 2022-23 budget to increase the total amount by $59,790.
I have a motion. Any other questions or comments? And can I get a second?
I'll second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye and nay. The ayes have it. Number 3, director's evaluation. So we'll go ahead and close the session.
Yeah, the individual's privacy outweighs the public's right to know, so we'll go ahead and close the meeting at this point in time and then reopen to finish the meeting.
Do you want to just call the front office one? Or you just call you?
Yeah, you want to just call me down?
You guys want to meet first? Want me to leave
Yeah, we
first?
probably should.
Yep. Okay.
I just noticed this morning I flew pretty low. Just a car. It wasn't a jet. It wasn't a prop.
Is that firefighter still over there? That tanker?
it's still there. Yeah.
There were a lot of firefighters on my flight from Denver when I was coming back from my trip up here, going up to Canada.
Oh, going to help out on that fire up there.
That would make sense. All right, camera on, we good? Thanks everybody for sticking around. We will go ahead and reopen the meeting. Let me know when same commissioners are still present. Sorry for the delay, we had a good long discussion. I think what we're gonna do, we'd like to actually table this until June. From our discussion, we have a request for information from John. So he knows what to get us. He'll send it out, we'll look at it. If we could in June, just put the feedback's all complete, so we'll just need a quick closed session on the June meeting. Shouldn't take long at all. And then we will go ahead and vote on the director's compensation after that in June, if that works. So we'll table that. Going around the board, any additional airport authority board comments? Commissioner Thompson? Commissioner Holden?
Just very happy with John's performance, Laura, Shailene, and Rod.
Good. Commissioner Gibbs, Commissioner Timber?
Yeah.
Commissioner Aaron's? I agree. Yep, I would second that as well, so, good job across the board, everybody, we appreciate the work you guys are doing. Any additional public comments? Easy enough. All right, with no further business before the board, we will declare this meeting adjourned. Does anybody need a break before the work session?
Already took it.
All right.
Yep, hold on.